I am a stress scientist and, of course, a stressed scientist. And I also study aging. So I'm both a professional and personal expert in stress and aging. And so are you. You are at least a personal expert in these topics that we all have. I've been studying stress for about 25 years. And it is, kind of the dark side of being. But I also study really what can, given that we all have stress and trauma or will, what can we do to make life richer, better, more meaningful, and live with the stress, the inevitable stressors that will happen to us. And so I've gotten much more deeply into research on meditation and contemplative practices. That's made me happier. But what I want to do is tell you some of the fundamentals of what we know about psychological stress. And hopefully some of this will be helpful for you to take home and take to the workplace. So in terms of aging, we typically think that work is stressful and retiring sooner is going to make us happier and healthier. We want to, retire before stress gets us and makes us sick. And at least that's how a lot of the kind of workplace lore and culture is in the States. Is that a familiar kind of ideology? So fundamentally, work should actually contribute and enhance our health, not detract from it. And so having that as a starting point default mode of thinking work is somewhere we spend most of our life, and so it really is important. The climate, the exact climate of support, compassion, vibrancy versus pressure, feeling devalued, feeling anxious and stressed all the time. It's very, very important to figure out where on the continuum is your workplace and what can you do to promote it and push the envelope toward having a healthy, vibrant, supportive workplace. So this is two people's health span. They both died at 80, and you can see one had, the death span for Mary was just a tiny few years at the end of life, compressed morbidity, we call it. Whereas for Jane, she had developed disease early in life at 60 and lived 20 years of her life in the disease span without the well-being and vitality that comes with health. So the question is not how long do you want to live, but how well do you want to live? How can you live longer in the health span? And this is intimately tied up with our work. We know in the stress field, how much stress people feel at work is one of the prototypes of how we study stress and health. We use work stress as an example because in large population-based studies, we know that work stress predicts obesity, heart disease, diabetes, early mortality. Now, it's not just any type of work stress. So we need to talk a bit more specifically about what do we mean by stress, what is the climate, and how do we get from a stressful workplace to a workplace of compassion and connection? So thinking about transforming your workplace must take into account the true conditions of work, the true limitations that people have on their freedom, their schedule, the objective work burden. These are factors that cause work burnout. We can't really talk about work stress without acknowledging there's true burden that needs to be manageable. So it's not about training people just to be stress resilient and putting them in toxic situations. Outer stress contributes to the perceived stress, to the lived experience of living and working in a stressful environment. And so there's both inner and outer stress, and I'm going to focus on the inner stress. I just wanted to acknowledge that creating a healthy workplace also means, changing some of the conditions at UCSF. For example, one of the biggest stressors of the workplace is commuting. And so we've needed to think a lot about the flexible hours and having people work at home, et cetera. So how does stress get under the skin? We think of all the things that affect us as the exposome, not the genome. That has some answers, but the exposome explains even more of our health. What are you being exposed to? So healthy work, and I'm going to tell you about one study that looked at old buildings, people living, working in these kind of workplaces without natural light, and in very old buildings that weren't engineered to be, human. They weren't looking at human factors, and so they compared people's health in these buildings to then they moved half the people early to a new building that had sunlight and windows, and it was just a completely different physical building environment. And they found that their heart rate variability changed and improved and became, they basically were able to measure their stress hormones and their autonomic nervous system and see improvements just from the physical workplace. So when we think of the exposome, that includes our physical environment, noise, pollution, chemicals. It includes our social environment. Who are we in contact with the most? Who is your supervisor? How much power do they give you, or how much power do you feel? Our home, our neighborhood, stressful events that happen, the emotional tone of relationships, supportive versus conflictual. And then all of that filters down into this is what we carry around in our mind. We have habits of the mind, and we are very sensitive to being on threat mode, survival mode. So when we have the exposome leaning toward high stressor exposure, we're going to be feeling more stress. And if we're not even aware of it, we might not report it, we're feeling it in our body. So we're just now figuring out, as stress researchers, how important unconscious stress is and how we can measure that in the body, even when people say are not aware or they're not reporting it. Burnout. Burnout is a specific type of psychological stress. When we think about work stress, the types of stress that get under the skin tend to be high demand, low control. There's different ways of measuring this. There's also the idea of high effort and low reward, low acknowledgement, low ability for promotion, et cetera. So that's how we typically think of work stress. But burnout is the next stage, and that is the response when people feel demoralized, they feel low efficacy or incompetent, and they feel emotionally exhausted. Now, I study how stress gets into the body, and at least one person, Zoe, knows what telomeres are. Has anyone here heard of telomeres? Okay, good. This is a savvy group. So one of the ways that we can understand aging before disease develops is taking blood and measuring the length of people's telomeres. Telomeres are these green caps at the ends of chromosomes that protect the chromosomes. We want to live a lifestyle that protects our telomeres, because when they get too short, the cells can no longer divide and replenish and keep our tissue healthy. So they are a determinant of aging. There are many. Telomeres are just one, but they're one we know a lot about, and we know that having short telomeres like that predicts earlier onset of diseases of aging. When we think about burnout and work stress, what studies have found is that work stress, as measured, doesn't reliably predict shorter telomeres, but burnout, in particular emotional exhaustion, does. So we don't want to leave stress unchecked. We want to think about really preventing before people get to the stage of burnout, preventing stress, turning it around. This is just an example of how we now also know that physical neighborhoods shape our telomeres. People who live in neighborhoods that where they feel unsafe, where there's low aesthetics, tend to also have shorter telomeres. So it's not just our feelings of stress, but it's also our physical environment and feeling unsafe that predicts shorter telomeres. Now, so I've talked about the environment. I also want to talk about how we affect each other. One of the most exciting areas in psychology is really about dyadic coregulation, which just means we affect each other. When we're near each other and we're interacting with someone close to us, our emotions and our physiology become synced or correlated. This is an example of two couples. First, in the first bar, they're at baseline, they're not interacting, and their heart rate variability is independent. But once they start a conversation and they're having eye contact, you can see that they have become co-regulated. They are synchronous. So what does that mean for you at work with people that you're dealing with a lot? It's possible that that's how much we are affecting each other invisibly. The good news is that doesn't just mean stress is contagious, but calm is also contagious. That is a big opportunity. So when we think about stress, there's events, like this red line shows an event, and then there's recovery, and it's over. No problem. We're very well equipped to deal with that. Our physiology, in fact, an acute stressor can be good for us. It can be anti-aging. That's a whole nother story. But look at the blue line. That's what happens when you enter an environment of work stress, and it goes on and on and on. This is a chronic stressor. There is no recovery. So what's happening inside psychologically? The cycle of chronic stress, it's not just that an event happens and you recover. We keep it with us overnight. We keep it with us hours later through, we're time travelers. We're ruminating or we're projecting, anticipating. And so it's these thought patterns or habits of the mind that we might not be aware of that keep our body and our sympathetic nervous system vigilant and aroused. So we call these mind states. We've also been studying mind wandering and negative mind wandering. Mind wandering is common. We do it about 50% of the time. But the type of mind wandering that we find is related to stress, stressful events, but also chronic stress, is rejection of the moment. What does that mean? That's a weird term, but I don't know what else to call it. It's when you wish you were not where you are. You wish you were doing something else. Don't raise your hand, but does anyone recall a moment when they wished they were doing something else? It's common. If that's your everyday work environment, that's toxic. So we have found that negative mind wandering is related to shorter telomeres. We think that it is associated. We found that, for example, caregivers have more negative mind wandering, and it helps explain their lower levels, their higher levels of cellular aging. What's another mind habit? So I've been talking about how we take stress with us and we keep thinking about it. What are the thoughts that we often have when we're stressed? Usually, when something bad happens, our thoughts are often about ourself. When we put someone in a magnet and we look at their brain activity, what do people do? They think about their favorite topic, which is themselves. So this is what our habit is. It's negative, so it's self-referential thought, self-referential processing. We know what it looks like in the brain. It's activity all along this midline prefrontal cortex. And we can see that, and we know it's associated with a depression and anxiety, because those self-referential thoughts, when we're stressed, are often self-critical thoughts. That's where your inner critic lives, and it keeps the stress response alive. So we also know that meditation is reducing the selfing. It reduces this activity in the midline. Probably any mind-body exercise would do that, because it takes away the self-focus and you focus on, for example, sensory experience. So resilience at work can be thought of, when we're thinking about inner habits, can be thought of as a few processes here. We must have emotional awareness rather than numbing out and keeping stress in our body. So that's the, kind of necessary but not sufficient. When we become aware, we can prevent that kind of reactivity cycle from continuing. And that means that we're basically becoming aware of what we're feeling. And that lets us use emotion in our life. And then a next step is when we're able to regulate ourselves, we can actually be regulating our interactions and be promoting that compassionate environment that we want. So what do I mean by emotional awareness? I'd like you to close your eyes. Remember a few minutes ago when you felt grounded in your seat. And really just focus now for a few seconds on your breathing, just noticing where your breath is. where any tension is, any sensation in your body. And then just ask yourself, what feelings do I have right now in my body, in my mind? You might feel bad, tense, tired, sluggish, anxious, calm. Just list as many emotions as you might be feeling. And then just breathe into where you're feeling that emotion. Wherever you feel the most sensation, take some deep breaths into that sensation. Emotions can flow through the body. Emotions last they're very transient if we let them be, when we don't keep thinking about them. Okay, so you can open your eyes, and those few seconds, I just led you through something we call emotion granularity. So rather than just feeling bad, like I asked my son how he's feeling, and he's bad. It's a bad day. It doesn't give us much information. And so then, with more processing, we finally might get to specific feelings and their causes. And that's a lot of information. So feeling in your body is important. That's becoming embodied. We get tremendous information from our body. And then just that simple emotion labeling is an important first step that shifts immediately your brain state, your body state. You can feel sad without having your body react to it with the awareness, without reacting to, feeling sad about feeling sad, right? Emotional reactivity. So what next? So if you become grounded in your emotional response, then you open up the ability to actually think about how someone else is feeling. And so this is where the compassion comes in, and ability to actually take others' perspectives and think about our common humanity and why someone you might be interacting with at work, how they're feeling. And that changes the whole interaction. So I want to briefly just talk about when you're dealing with something stressful, it is very easy and habitual to feel threatened, to have a big stress response. And that's how we're wired. But with training, we can actually have a positive stress response. What doesn't kill you can make you stronger. These positive stress responses can be good for us. So what do I mean by that? Well, lion and gazelle are both stressed. Right now, their heart rate is racing, their blood pressure is high, but they're not having the same response. Lion is having a positive stress response with all this cardiac output and excitement. He's going to gain something. Gazelle is running for her life. She may be about to die. So her physiological response is high cortisol instead of adrenaline. She's having vasoconstriction. Blood pressure is high, not because her heart is being efficient, but rather because she's vasoconstricted. So that's just an example of the two stereotypes of positive challenge response versus this kind of threat response. So in humans, we have this too. We have, when we are feeling like we can manage a situation, we are actually directing our body to have a positive stress response, higher cardiac output, less vasoconstriction. So that's what we call a challenge appraisal. And that feeds back to make our brain more oxygenated. When you say to yourself, my heart's racing, I need to go cope with this problem, this is excitement. This is a challenge. That is going to enhance and further the oxygenation and the positive problem solving. This has actually been studied. My colleague, Wendy Mendez at UCSF, teaches students the positive stress response. They actually perform better in many ways. They perform better on the GRE test, for example. So when we have a threat response, we might feel, I don't have what it takes. We feel threatened, anxious, versus when we have a challenge response, we feel hopeful and excited. These different responses map onto our physiology and our telomere length. So more of a threat response is associated with shorter telomeres. So a lot of what we face, of course, is objectively may seem stressful, but in different levels to different people. It's in our perspective. What will you make of this situation? So much of our stressors are routine and predictable. So you can think ahead. What is today going to be like, and how do you want to think about it? How do you want your heart to be responding? You can do that emotional labeling before a stressor and be telling yourself these affirmations like, my body is energizing me, this is excitement. One thing about work stress is, it's not all just, we can't control everything with our appraisals because sometimes demands are out of whack with the resources we have. So it's also important to just make a list of what are the resources you have for this situation and what are the demands. The work demands are not always in your control, but the resources are. You can increase your resources. You can increase your social support, your knowledge, your delegation, the way you're thinking about something. There are different ways to increase resources. So, who do you want to be in this moment? The lion or the gazelle? How do you move from the feeling threatened and selfing, being very focused on your own response or your stress response, to actually thinking about how am I affecting my work environment, my colleagues? One very powerful technique is gratitude. Take a dose every morning, decrease feelings of threat. So gratitude at work is very easy and common to express. So for example, just saying thank you. How do you say how do you appreciate someone? There are people that have roles that feel invisible and underappreciated, and you can transform their experience at work, acknowledging the effort they put, specifically, not just saying thank you, but thank you for this exactly, and how that affected you and helped you. There have been studies on what simple things like this do to the work environment. So for example, increases trust, respect, feeling belonging, feeling more purpose at work, and engagement. So this is powerful, this is free, this is something you could do tomorrow. What about meditation? I mentioned at the beginning how studying stress is kind of dark and stressful, but it's been very fun to also study meditation. And that is one way we can develop that stress resilience at work. This is a direct way to develop the awareness of our emotions, the labeling. We could do loving kindness meditation, which can change our relationships with others, even if they don't know that we're doing this meditation, and sending them gratitude and wishes of well-being changes how we feel about them. Remember that heart rate variability co-regulation? If you are feeling differently to someone, you might be affecting them differently, body and mind. Meditation, I wrote, can it increase telomere length? My colleagues at University of New Wales here, Nicola Schutt and John Malouf, have been doing these beautiful reviews and meta-analyses about telomeres and what's affecting them, and optimism, they've shown, is very specifically associated with longer telomeres. And meditation appears to increase telomerase. This is kind of a growing field, but it does look like we can slow our cell aging with regular practices. Most of these studies are on mindfulness, but one just came out this month on loving kindness. And it may be that loving kindness meditation is actually even more beneficial. In terms of telomeres, it showed that it benefited telomeres more than mindfulness meditation. It slowed telomere attrition over the period of the study. Lastly, I'll just mention purpose in life. This is a predictor of longevity, and this is extremely relevant to the workplace. When you get up, how much do you feel engaged or looking forward to your work, your day? How much meaning and purpose does it have? And as people of power who are supervising other people, how much can you help others develop that subjective sense of power and purpose in their work? My last point is vacation time. We can't really talk about work stress and vacation and burnout without talking about vacation. Have you taken all of your vacation days this year? If you said yes, you should be proud, because many people, at least 40% in the States, do not take their vacation. People only take 50% of leave, and then they work on vacation. So it is a problem that we can't turn off work. Vacation is critical for both, body and mind are pretty much connected, but for both these habits of the mind as well as giving the body a break. And, the economics show that it is beneficial to productivity. So we want to think about the balance between these two fundamental motivating forces in our life, love and fear and anxiety. Developing love, relationship support, avoiding threat states and anxiety. So telomeres are not only sensitive to stress, but they are sensitive to positive social support. People who feel more support tend to have longer telomeres. People who have more positive relationships versus what we call conflictual or ambivalent have longer telomeres. People who have been married longer have longer telomeres. And the longer they've been married, the more their telomeres are correlated. What does that mean? Maybe we age together, we share these environments and these influences, and we can really try to develop these forces of more positive influences in our daily culture of work, and be noticing and sensitive to threat and how we're both feeling threatened and how we threaten others. So work can contribute to well-being and health. We can move from stress and anxiety toward a culture of compassion, love, and support. Support and daily purpose predict well-being and longevity. So remember that your emotions are contagious. We can use that to transform our work environments and really think about not just our individual resilience, but social resilience, if we can be doing this as a group. And then, of course, we need the environmental changes to create a healthier workplace. And another topic that I've been very interested in is, well, what happens when we think about the future and how technology is transforming jobs as well as we have an aging workforce? And so it's even more important for the workplace to be more engaging in promoting health, especially for older people as they age, versus ageism and having so many people unemployed. So this is something to think about for the future. So please stay in touch. I have a website where I have, for example, a chapter of our book on the telomere effect, several chapters, but one is chapter 4 about how to promote the positive stress response. So if you just go to the website and click on the telomere effect, you can get that book in Spanish, Chinese, English. Yes, so thank you so much for your attention. I'm sorry we won't have time for questions.